Hopefully you can read that. Let's see. It's there. I almost thought we had one of those. No, we don't. One of those new microphones that mean you don't need the wireless, but didn't sound like it. Oh well. Here, show you that. Not surprising that the password one is winning. Same happened in the first class, the first half of the semester. And I think with them and probably with y'all too, it came down to um, that second prompt is easier to understand with where you were talking about a new programming language and the Linux community and stuff like that would be is more challenging for sure. I still like the prompt though, just because it's an interesting thing that's playing out in the open source community. I may come back to it during the lecture. We'll see. But anyway, I'm not surprised. But it's almost certainly going to be the passwords. People have answered it now. '28. So theory it could change, but it's not. I'm pretty sure it's not going to change. Stop the recording. Yes. Turn this down just a tear. Yeah, it's kind of high. Okay. Okay. Time to get started. There's your word. It's on the board as well. E-learning is cooperating today, so we'll go back to attendance like before. So your third essay now. That is due tonight. The second one is mostly graded. The grader just has a few for me to look at. So if you don't have a grade now, you will pretty soon. Should be by the end of today. Um, and your next survey is due also tonight. It's almost a foregone conclusion at this point, but as I said, not a surprise. The password one is going to be easier for you to write, I'm sure. So, uh, not surprising that that's what most people picked. Um, anyway, and we can talk to that on Thursday as usual. Any questions for me? Any issues before we get started? I don't expect any, but I don't want to not give you that chance. Okay. This is also, so, last week we were talking about freedom of speech and things like that. This one, I don't know. I mean, it depends on your mindset, I guess, if this one's interesting to you or not. Um, but we're talking about computer crime, computer security issues, things like that. Um, and the first point is something that kind of is a running thread through the course is that the things that we're seeing today that may feel new are not necessarily new. The form that they take is new, but we have had spam in the form of junk mail for ages now. Fraud has been around for many, for forever probably. Ever since people started to communicate with each other, they're trying to trick each other, I suspect. Stealing things, all this kind of stuff is nothing new. And it's like what we said with intellectual property that the digital realm and the internet in particular just makes a lot of these things easier to trigger, to have happen, easier to commit these kind of crimes. So the thing that has changed is really the scale. Whereas in the past, you could go break into a doctor's office if you really wanted to see some health records and scan through all their paper charts and find out stuff that you want to know. Now, all you really need to do is break into their um, electronic medical records, and then you can get everything on everybody and just, potentially just download it and have all of it. The size of these breaches, the scale of what criminals can do when they breach a computer system is what's so different and what makes some of these topics more relevant to us today. You get down to that Yahoo one. I was one of the 500 million people that had a Yahoo account. I don't think I ever saw anything from the settlement. If I did, I've forgotten it. And then, just instead of, in the tens or hundreds of people affected if there's a break-in and records are lost or stolen, whatever, it's now, can be millions depending on who it is. That Target attack, by the way, that one's, if you have the book, that one's talked about in the book. It goes into details, a pretty interesting one. The other thing that has changed is you don't have to go to a location to steal their stuff anymore. If it's online or accessible online, then, in theory, you just have to get past whatever security they've got, and then you can get that information. Uh, and of course, that's governments have been involved in that as well. In fact, there was this is not government hacking, but government getting involved in something. There was just this morning, I saw there was was it Reveal or REvil, whatever. Um, the U.S. government believes they found and or yeah, I think they may have charged one. Yeah, they've got one of the people, and I think they've got a warrant out for the other one. Anyway, there's and they believe they found these people, and they found some of the money they had gotten. So in theory, at least, some of the money that was uh, extorted out of the people that they attacked uh, might be able to go back to them. So see how that develops. Anyway, that's um, this is, I mean, this kind of information, it's almost unheard of up until here recently. At least I haven't heard of it. But governments have gotten more sophisticated in tracking down the people that do these, commit fraud in various ways, and they're being more public about it. That may be the bigger thing, is they're willing to be public with it, and so changing the calculus that these folks have to make when they decide what to do. The rules, we talked about this when we were talking about privacy. The idea that if you are if you're a site, if you're an internet site, you pretty much have to follow worldwide regulations, because unless you do some work, most anyone on the planet can find your website and access what you have. What that also means is that governments from outside of where you physically live could impose restrictions based on the fact that their citizens can reach you. So that's in fact, you see some of this. Well, you see some of this with Google and Apple. In fact, there was just a thing in the last week about Google making changes to how they how they charge, or how they work with developers in South Korea. Google was not very nice in what they decided to do, but they're trying to protect a source of income. Anyway, and the tools, I mean, tools for criminals, but also tools that we use and they're, often forced to use in order to combat crime. Back when I was your age, the general, as far as like password security, it was just, you weren't supposed to reuse passwords, keep it 8, 10, 12 characters. Well, since then, the recommendations have changed to not only should you have longer and hard to guess passwords, but you should have a second way of identifying yourself. We will talk about that some, presuming the password prompt is the one that you choose. We'll talk some more about that later. Doing okay? Any questions so far? A little bit of terminology and a little bit of history alongside it. The term hacker, if you transported somebody from the 1970s that actually knew the term, it was not in what, wasn't in wide use back then, I'm sure. You transport them here, you'd tell them the word hacker, and their eyes would probably light up. If you called them a hacker, their eyes would probably light up, because back in those days, a hacker was someone who was a chief nerd, I guess. Um, Back in those days, you had to deal with hardware very closely. Operating systems, though they did exist, were very basic, and so you were on the hook to do a lot of things that we take for granted now. And so someone who could make sense of the hardware and get it to do things that nobody else had gotten it to do yet, those were celebrities in the software community, especially, I mean, in the hacking community. Um, since then, we've taken the term to mean something else, to mean something more nefarious. Obviously, instead of trying to get hardware that nobody has really figured out yet, getting it to do things, we're trying to get a hardware or a computer network or something to do things that the people that run it don't want it to do. So some of, I guess, what they do, being on kind of the bleeding edge of trying to mess with uh, mess with hardware and software is still around, but whereas once it was just trying to get the thing to work in the first place, now it's generally for a more nefarious reason. The modern hacker is, you can subdivide them into 3 categories. At one end, you have the white hat hacker. That is someone who, what would they be called? Like in a security situation, they might be called the blue team, I think is the color they use. Red team for the adversary. Blue team is someone who may be a security expert who looks at your network and says, well, there's a possible security issue here. They may do research, they may do penetration testing or pen testing. They may, do things that a hacker does, but they do it on behalf of a company in order to help that company or that government or that organization uh, improve their security. So, they're acting at the behest of someone who wants to improve their security. On the other end, you have what's termed a black hat hacker. If you don't know why it's white and black, that I believe goes back to the westerns of probably 50s, 60s, especially the black and white ones, where if you watch one of those, I'm not even sure which, I'm vaguely familiar with like Gunsmoke and some of the probably later ones. But those old ones, you knew who the good guy was because he came in wearing a white hat. You knew who the bad guy was because he'd come into the saloon wearing a black hat. And so we've just kind of taken those terms. Back then it was shorthand for, without me, because the acting, I'm sure, was not up to modern standards. They had to let you know who was the bad guy without explaining it. We do the same. We've taken those terms to mean a white hat hacker, someone who works for a company, is kind of like, is the good guy. If you want to think of it that way. Um, the black hat hacker, say that 3 times fast, is someone who is trying to break into things where they don't have permission and just sow chaos or extort money or anything like that. There are some that are kind of in the middle, so we call them gray hat hackers for obvious reasons. These are lots of times companies or individuals that will go looking for security exploits, but not necessarily to exploit them themselves. They might be after a bug bounty or for the notoriety of saying, I found a 0-day bug in Mac OS or Windows or whatever system. And they kind of, they're kind of in between, whereas, sometimes they might be considered white hat because they found something and then they tell the owner of that software about the problem. But if the owner of the software doesn't do anything about it, they might say, well, or decides not to pay them or something, then they might turn around and say, well, then I'll just release the exploit online to anybody. Anyway, that's kind of just somewhere in between the two. The idea of a hack, I think, along with hacker, if you go back to the 70s, that was probably an okay thing, because just to get to deal with that early hardware required a lot of figuring things out and playing around and getting the hardware to do things that you wanted to do, but nobody's ever told us to do that before. So you're just kind of figuring things out as you go. Nowadays, there are 2 terms for it, or 2 definitions for hack, at least 2, and neither one of them are nice. The first one, the more benign one, is where you are creating a program and you've got a problem that you're trying to solve and you're short on time, so you just kind of figure a way to make it work. Usually it's, it's not, if you're using an object-oriented language, you're probably not using it. It's not an object-oriented solution, or it's just really fragile. You have lots of constants where you probably shouldn't have constants, and things like that, where it works, but you're not proud of it. And you finish it, and then you immediately would want to go back, tear it apart, and put a better solution into it. That's one. The other one is where you're a hacker and you are hacking into a system. That one probably needs no introduction. Any questions that make sense? The tools that hackers use, some of these, we're not going to go over all of them. I don't want to insult your intelligence. You may have heard of all of the ones we're going to talk about. Here's a few we won't talk about. The first one I do want to talk about is the idea of phishing. This has been and you've probably heard the term by now. It is something that has grown in the past, I don't know, decade maybe. It's really gone mainstream. I actually I got a notice that claimed to come from Exchange, Microsoft, no, from, yeah, Microsoft Exchange on Sunday, I think, even just in the last few days, where it's saying, we believe there's been a password breach and we need you to go in and change your password, which was a problem on, I mean, it may have been legitimate, I don't know, but it was a problem on several counts. One is that there wasn't anything in the news. Something like that would have been in the news. I went and checked and didn't find it. Another issue is that I don't, you know, I'm the same as y'all. You don't set your, we have Microsoft accounts that we use for email and whatever, but we don't set the password through them. We set it through the school, and then that propagates over to Microsoft. Uh, the single sign-on propagates around, and the link looks suspicious. So anyway, they are out there. General phishing, a general phishing attack is where you pretend you're a bank or you're somebody with trying to help somebody, and you send them a link that will, it probably will send them to something that looks like the bank or looks like what they're after. It looks like the normal thing that they're used to using, but then you type in your credentials or whatever, and nothing happens, but except that they've captured your login, your username and password, and now they can access as you. Um, with a phishing attack, it's generally pretty broad to where instead, you will target thousands of people, maybe everybody at a company, and all you're really hoping for is that one out of the thousand or thousands clicks your link and gives you their information. Your success rate does not have to be high to be effective. You just kind of splatter everybody with it and hope you catch something. Kind of like just like taking a net and dragging it and not worrying about what gets caught as long as you get a fish. Spear fishing is different in the fact that in the scope and the effort it takes. One of the famous ones of these, at least in security circles, is I think it was John Podesta, who worked with Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. He was the target of a spear phishing attack. I think it was him, or if else it was someone else on Clinton's team. And this one was not just your garden variety. Here's a link. Please click this and give me your login information. This was very targeted specifically at that person. If it was Podesta or someone else, where someone had probably done, or somebody had done research to know some things that maybe the general public wouldn't normally know, things that would kind of drop somebody's defenses. It's like, we've been talking, at the meeting last week you said that something 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 whatever, and I'd like to help you with that, so please click here so that you can, so we can set up a meeting or whatever. Something that's really tailored for one person, to where you do your research into that person and your only target is, you have a target of one, and you put in the extra effort to try to trick that one person into giving you access. So usually it's like a celebrity or politician or somebody that has access to something that very few people have access to. And if you can trick them into it, then you can get in as them and find out what's going on. Farming, and you notice the PH instead of F, a phonetic thing that I guess people trying to amuse themselves. This uses the domain name system. If you are not familiar with DNS, I can give you the 1-minute version. DNS, if you're not aware of it, is a service that you use whenever you type in google.com and then you actually get directed to Google's site. It's what turns google.com into an actual internet address and a number, or it is a number, whether it's IPv4 or IPv6. The V6 ones could look like they're not numbers, but they're just hexadecimal. Anyway, so there's this system that says, okay, I know that Google's main server is at this address, and it just does that translation for you. What a pharming attack does is it will tell DNS providers, and not, this is not you directly, this is telling an intermediary that, hey, Google.com is not actually at 1.2.3.4, it's at 5.6.7.8. I'm making numbers up, of course. It's really over here. And if the DNS provider buys it, then every time somebody types in google.com, they go to their DNS, they say 5.6.7.8, and now you're going to somebody who is impersonating Google. So it's similar to a phishing attack, but instead of attacking you and making you click a link, they're attacking the DNS provider, and there's more than one of these. Generally, your ISP either runs one or has one that they connect you to. But anyway, so they can do it that way. There's also a way to change it, or there's a way to do this where normal DNS queries are sent as plain text. They're not encrypted. It's only recently that these things have started to be encrypted, or at least have an encrypted option. Another way you could do an attack like this is intercept the query especially the one coming back, the response coming back from the DNS provider, and change the address that it's giving you. So you don't even have to compromise the DNS, you just compromise that traffic, and then you redirect people's browsers. Unknowingly, they go off to the wrong server, and then you can pretend to be Google or whoever it is you're attacking and get people to think that you're legitimate when you're not. So anyway, that's two versions of that. Those are much harder for you and me to recognize because we're not clicking anything, we're not doing anything specific to fall under the attack. It's just something happening under the away from our eyes. Two things that can be done about this. One is DNS providers have to validate what they get, validate these updates that they get, and the other is that nowadays you can encrypt your DNS queries. It's called DOH for DNS over HTTPS, an acronym that has two acronyms in itself. Aren't they nice? So anyway, that's pharming. Ransomware is, that story I showed you was about two people. One was from Ukraine, the other was from Russia, charged with conducting ransomware attacks. A few years ago, this started happening with government, with like cities, counties, school districts. It's also happening to companies more often now. There was one, in fact, that this group was allegedly involved in that shut down a meat processing plant. It shut down, shut down a supermarket in Sweden, I believe. You can look. It's on the homepage of Ars Technica right now if you want to go back and look. But I do want to show you this. This is a site that tries to track ransomware attacks on entities based on what information has been revealed about them. Oops, I'm going to do that. Okay, anyway. So you can see White Settlement, that's a I guess UIL looks like thing. Go away. There's a problem with zooming in. Some that were close by. Wilmer, they demanded 2.5 million. Oftentimes they demand a lot less than that. Oh, that's the same one, sorry. Come on. Let's see. Hill, Sometimes they, man, I'm sorry, it's hard to tell with this. Oh, there we go. Unknown. There's some of these. It's Cockrell Hill. White Settlement. Keep showing the same ones. Keene, same group, same demand. They didn't pay. Kaufman, same group. This off in Athens. So this time, and this I think is fairly typical. Let me see if I can zoom now. There we go. So this was Athens is a town, one of several in Texas that's named after a foreign city. There's a Rome, although we spell it wrong, Texas, and a Paris, Texas, and some others. Anyway, it's about 2 hours from Dallas. This group attacked the school district. Usually, what happens is that it's one of two things, or a combination of two things. One is that they go in and they encrypt everything so that your network becomes useless because all your data is encrypted, and they offer to sell you the decryption key. The other thing they do, and I think this is becoming more common, is they don't only encrypt what's there, they also make a copy of everything so that, especially if you're a healthcare system or a government entity, some kind of government entity, they will say, you pay us this much and we will be kind and not leak all of this data to someone else. Sometimes, like this school district, it was only $50,000, so they just went ahead and paid it. Anyway, there's, you can find plenty of stories about detailing how this happened. One of the things that makes this tricky for someone being attacked is having the data leaked could be a violation of law, especially for healthcare records or something like that. And so they may feel compelled to pay even if they could get their system back up without paying. They feel compelled to, just to prevent that leakage, which the bad guys know, and so they do it. Those 2.5 millions are, I think, well, from what I've heard, those are kind of outliers. Usually, it's in this kind of, they pick an amount that's small, that's big enough to make it worth their while, but small enough that whoever they're attacking is they're going to find it's cheaper just to pay and keep going than to mitigate, try to restore their network or their data and whatever on their own. Anyway, so that's one place if you want to go look around at some. Anyway, keep going. Botnet, another one you may well have heard of. This one really, it's still around, I'm sure. It kind of had its heyday a few years ago. I have not heard as much about these, I don't think. It may just be that I'm not listening in the right places. But this is where you find a vulnerability in Windows or Android or Mac OS or whatever, Linux. And then you exploit this on a whole bunch of computers. And then you use the software that you implant on those computers to do something else. Generally speaking, you're not trying to take over the machines, or you're really, a lot of this is actually, you're doing this and you're trying to fly under the radar. So you may be taking CPU cycles from somebody, but not so many that they're going to notice necessarily. And so you might have this army of bots that you've created, this software that you spread to a whole bunch of people's computers, and then tell them to start sending spam email or doing a denial of service attack on someone, or more recently, mine cryptocurrency using using their machines, and kind of try to do it at a low enough level that people don't notice that you're actually doing it. And so you're fine with only getting, a small percentage of all these computers' performance because you have tens of thousands or millions or whatever. You've got a whole lot of them to make up the difference. One of the things I know Microsoft has been involved in this. They're the one that I think I've heard about the most, where they will go in and work with authorities, government authorities, and they will actually take over the, there's, so you got all these computers and they're all being controlled by some entity somewhere. The best way to attack them, or the easiest way, I guess, the way to get them all is to attack the attackers, take over take over the server, or do some DNS trickery to make one of your servers the control server, and then you stop them from doing whatever they were doing. That's certainly easier in a sense than expecting everyone to put out a to apply the patch you make for the vulnerability. But anyway, they do that as well. Of course, companies do that as well, but that's one of the ways that they counteract these attacks. Any questions so far? Kind of getting through these. All right. Other things. Um, so y'all are fairly young, but have any of you been the victim of a identity theft yet? Anybody kind of got one there. It's happened to me. Happened a few years ago. Somebody went to Target. They opened up a credit card account in my name. I guess I have my social security number and whatever. The limit that Target put on the card for before they verified anything, or I guess until you started paying the bills, was $750. So they went and they bought a TV and a gift card of some kind and something else, and then left. By the time I figured out what it was, Target had already, they only keep their, they had video records of stuff like this, somebody going to the store and doing whatever. They could have traced it, but it had been too long. They'd already done it. I didn't have to, the good news is that when this happens, you rarely, if ever, actually pay anything. This is fraud. And so what ends up happening in this case, Target just ate the money they lost, this almost $750 they lost. It's just the cost of doing business to them. That's, opening a credit card account fraudulently is the most common, I think, is the most common type of identity theft. I've heard of cases where like an evil parent will, or step parent or somebody, like straight out of a Disney movie, where the evil parent or step parent goes in and opens accounts or does things as their children, commits identity theft on their own kids or on other relatives, which, those people should definitely be tossed in jail. So that's one. My mother-in-law got somebody filed some years ago, filed a tax return in her name with her social security number. Presumably, they were just trying to get her refund. And so, they can say, I'm really this person, and send the refund to this checking account. I believe it was caught before anything happened, and she got a refund later, but she had to go through some extra hassle. Other things, there's other ways. Usually it's about getting money from somebody or getting stuff, without paying for it. If it happens to you, just so you know, it's a hassle more than anything. Generally, you have to file a police report and tell, obviously tell whoever issued the credit card or whatever that it was done fraudulently, and usually that takes care of it. I use one of the credit monitoring. Which one do I use? I forget. I use one of them now, and so it has happened once since, where they detect the credit monitoring I use detected somebody trying to open an account and blocked it before anything bad happened, and so that was taken care of. Nobody got anything by using my name that time. So anyway, that's if you're not familiar with it, count yourself fortunate. It's out there and it's growing, and it's kind of it's one of those things where if you're if you're Target or Visa or Discover or whoever, they're generally okay with some of this happening, just because it's cheaper for them to it makes more sense for them to allow some of this to happen and just, eat the money that they lose uh, for this fraud, rather than just really trying to tighten things down so that you only give a credit card to somebody who really is that person. The cost of doing that and the hassle it'd be for their customers is so much that they just, it's easier to let a little bit of fraud happen and just eat the difference. Another type of um, abuse, um, people doing bad things, is termed hacktivism. So this would be, take an example, if you are a climate activist, let's say, and you're sick of the lies of the big oil companies, you might go to Exxon site and just either just take it down or put an image of replace the front page with an image of a tree, or do something like that. Or you know, if you're a climate skeptic, you might go to Greenpeace's website and do the similar thing to them. It's kind of where you believe so strongly in a cause that you're willing to take what is an illegal action, as part of your efforts to stop whatever uh, evil that you feel is out in the world. Certainly happens with, I just pick oil companies and Greenpeace because they're easy. Happens with governments and with companies that you don't like. You might take your anger out on Facebook or Apple or whoever by attacking their network or doing stuff like that. Or potentially going in and grabbing some data and releasing it to the public to try to make them look bad. That's actually, um, not sure what the motive that I mentioned that one on the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, back in 2016 with Hillary Clinton and John Podesta. I believe the person that did that was actually, um, their goal. I don't know if they got paid for this, but their goal was to grab information from the DNC, and I think they sent it to WikiLeaks, if I remember correctly. And I believe one of the things it showed was that the DNC was definitely favoring Clinton over Bernie Sanders back in 2016. I think that's one of the things that came out that was embarrassing and damaging. So generally here, you're not looking for money, you're looking to hurt. You're looking to hurt somebody. Maybe they've hurt you, or maybe you just believe that they are the root of all evil in the world, and so you go after them. Governments, excuse me, get involved in hacks as well. You can read through some of that. And the US government is no different. We have US Cyber Command and the NSA, and people whose job it is to uh, find vulnerabilities in other nations, whether it's to just monitor them or to take something down. That link there, it's a long article, but it's really interesting. At least I found it so. Back probably a decade ago now, as there was Iran has been in the news, of course, for longer than a decade. Their ambitions to have, or at least the U.S. says they have ambitions to get nuclear weapons. I think they've enriched uranium close to the point where they could get a nuclear weapon. Um, anyway, so something that happened around a decade ago was this thing called Stuxnet, Stuxnet. That was a very clever bit of code that some nationals, presumably either Israel or the United States. I don't know if anyone is. I don't think. I'm pretty sure no one's ever claimed responsibility. I don't know if it's been conclusively shown who it was that did this, but they managed to get this clever program past whatever security measures Iran had. I don't believe the systems they were attacking were actually online, so somebody had to go and physically upload it on a USB key or something. And what it did was it caused the centrifuges, or some of the centrifuges that Iran was using in their uranium enrichment, to malfunction and at least damage themselves. I forget all the details now, but set back their nuclear program by some amount of time. And just, you know, the one of the ways that people decide if it's just a lone wolf working on their own, or if it's a government entity, is just the quality of the code that they create, and just how devious their stuff is. This one was especially um, hard to spot because it was so well written. Um, so anyway, if you like that kind of stuff, that's a really it's I think a few years old now, but it's a great article talking about how all that happened. And there's other espionage that happens. Whereas in the past, you had to have an agent that would go and compromise somebody or get them to speak out of school about defense secrets. Now, if you can get onto somebody's network, you might be able to get stuff that you're not supposed to have. That can be easier. One of the interesting things the book talks about, pretty sure it came from the book, is this idea of the U.S. policy, and as far as I know, we haven't changed it, is that we equate hacktivism or hacking incidents to be the same as a physical attack. So, take for example, uh, if you hack the nation's power grid and cause electrical outages or surges or things like that, the U.S. we say we would consider that the same as actually attacking, physically attacking the U.S. infrastructure. That's, to me at least, that's a problematic kind of policy. It sounds good, but that's going to be difficult to actually use because when go back to 1941 when Pearl Harbor happened. Lots of video, lots of evidence. You see Japanese planes bombing Pearl Harbor. It was obvious who did it. With a cyber attack, that's not as easy to prove. You would have to convince your population that yes, it was the Russians or the Iranians or the whoever, North Koreans, whoever it is, that actually did this attack that caused all of this damage. That's a harder thing to do than to say that, that bombers from a nation came and bombed some U.S., did something to U.S. assets, to U.S. Territory or U.S. troops or whatever. Um, I mean, it's in theory, it's the same kind of thing. We had to trace when September 11th happened. We had to, I think Al Qaeda took credit for it. That may help, but um, you know, if you're going to take your nation to war, you have to prove to your representatives and to the people that that's who did it, and that can be difficult if it's a cyber group that doesn't want to be found. There's even with uh, election interference, you have the Trump administration that harped on Ukraine, whereas others were saying it was Russia, you know, and by implication in league with the president, which I don't think has ever been a direct link has never been shown, but that's certainly anyway. That's for political reasons. Even saying who did what can be difficult. Any questions about any of that? We've got about 5 minutes, so we won't get through all this, but that's fine. The reason this is so damaging or so difficult to combat is that there are that so many ways that you could be vulnerable. The first, and I don't know if it's the most obvious, but certainly probably the biggest of all of these is just the fact that the internet was created as this open framework. It was originally done for universities and I think government agencies to talk to each other before it spread to everyone. That that anybody could come online as long as they register in the right place. They can have a server up. That openness is a double-edged sword. It made the spread of information amazingly easy. It also makes the spread of misinformation amazingly easy, and also makes it easy for someone who is not nice to get on the internet and start doing whatever they want to do. And since so much of even what companies do is online, you know, UT Dallas. I mean, I get into my grades. I'm not in some super secure facility. It's a lot. It's my username, it's my password, and it's my Duo. That is what protects what protects your grades. So y'all hope I create good passwords, which I do. It's a randomized thing. Anyway, so the sheer openness of the internet is part of what makes this so easy. Another one, and this is the prompt that y'all are likely not to pick, comes from here. Um, the operating systems we use have their roots from long, long ago. It's a little bit maybe weird to think of it this way, but Windows as its entity, as we know it today, has its roots in the 1980s, whereas Mac OS, iOS, Android, Linux all have their roots from way before that, the 1960s. So we're talking about, I mean, how much of that code has actually survived for 60 years, or yeah, 60 years now ish. That's probably not much of it has, and it's been rewritten, and of course the switch from Unix to Linux, that was a rewrite, but it used a lot of the same uh, conventions and APIs and things. Modern Windows dates back to Windows NT more so than it does to DOS and like Windows 3.1 and those. But in either case, this is very old software we're talking about. And one of the reasons we still teach C and C++ at places like UT Dallas is because it's still in such wide use. You look in the guts of almost any operating system. I think there are some now that are trying to use Rust instead of C and C++. But you look inside an operating system and you're going to see C and C++. Now, it may not be code that you or I could necessarily understand right off the bat. If you've ever looked at, if you want to be confused, just look up the code for the C++ standard template library and your eyes will glaze over trying to make sense of it. My eyes will too. Don't feel bad about that. But anyway, we have this really old code written in a really old language, and a language that, of course, you've probably done C++ enough here and C enough to say memory management in C and C++ is bad. Um, you can certainly make it work, and of course, people made it work, but C and C++ make it amazingly easy to do really dumb things with memory. Pointer arithmetic gone wrong, indexing that you go out of your index bounds and nothing stops you. Just even as simple as I was showing, or I'm about to show, no, I did show on Thursday, my 1336 class, that how you create an array, and as soon as you pass that to a function or a method, that function or method cannot find the size of the array again, just because of the way the array is passed. It's passed as a pointer. All of that stuff, and I better stop. I'm gonna have to stop here in a minute. Anyway, all of that badness is present in these operating systems. And so I mean, you look at, I've linked to an article, there's other people that'll say the same thing. If Windows and Mac OS and Android and all of them were not written in C and C++, if we could actually go in and rewrite them in something like Rust that has memory protection built in, we would wipe out over half of the security vulnerabilities in these products, just because they wouldn't be possible. The mistakes that people made intentionally or not just wouldn't be possible. But rewriting an operating system is a gigantic endeavor and not something that we're going to be stuck with these for a while yet. Anyway, and that's the other prompt is, how could we start improving these things? But that's all right. Okay, any last questions? And we're out of time. And if not, see you on Thursday and we'll finish this and talk about your prompt. Have a good day. Bye bye.